With that, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for attending the 23rd Annual Tulane Environmental Law Summit. My name is Tristan Danley. I'm one of the student organizers for this year's summit, and I have the great pleasure of introducing today's keynote, Maya Van Rossum. Maya Van Rossum is the Delaware River Keeper and has led the Delaware River Keeper Network since 1994. She's been an environmental attorney and activist for the past 25 years and has served as an adjunct professor and director of the Environmental Law Clinic, which she founded, at Temple's Beasley School of Law since 2002. In 2013, Maya and her team won a watershed legal victory against the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania that not only protected Pennsylvanians from fracking, but declared that their environmental rights are inherent, indefeasible, and deserving of the highest levels of protection from the state. Following this victory, Van Rossum inaugurated the Green Amendment movement, dedicated to empowering every American community to mobilize for constitutional change. Her book, The Green Amendment, which is also outside, pick up a copy, lays out an inspiring new agenda for environmental advocacy that empowers people to bypass laws that are designed to accommodate pollution rather than prevent it, and turn to the ultimate legal authority, state and federal constitutions. We are so excited to have her join us tonight. Please join me in welcoming Maya Van Rossum.
Turn this around. Thank you very, very much. And I would like to just take a moment to congratulate the Tulane Law School students and faculty for organizing this incredibly wonderful event over the past 2 days. I've experienced portions of it, and I've heard from all of you out in the hallways just singing their praises. So I think if we could just take a moment to congratulate them on their success. So I will try to stay by the microphone, but I tend to wander. Hopefully I'll speak loud enough for everybody, even when I'm wandering. As you said, I am the Delaware River Keeper, and I work throughout the 4 states of the Delaware River watershed, which includes New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Delaware, and we also work at the federal level. Is that working well? Okay, great. That works better. All right. I have to hold it close to my mouth. Okay. This is feeling a little jumpy. Okay, we'll go. No. So we work on a lot of issues at the Delaware River Keeper Network, but I'm not here to speak about the work of the Delaware River Keeper Network per se. I really am here to speak about an outgrowth of our work at the Delaware River Keeper Network and the creation of what we call the Green Amendment movement, which I hope will inspire all of you and all of those out in the ether world to think about the protection and restoration of our environment moving forward in a different way. Because the fact of the matter is, we have thousands of environmental protection laws. Can you hear me in the back if I speak like this?
Yes.
It's a lot easier. Thank you. We have thousands of environmental protection laws when you look at the local level, the state level, the federal level. And when each one of these laws was passed, and as they've been implemented up until present day, they've accomplished many important good things for our communities and our environment. They've reduced pollution, they've prevented illness, they've literally saved lives, they've created jobs, they've supported healthy economies, they've protected communities from droughts and floods and wildfires. They've done many wonderful things. But the fact of the matter is, despite all of the good all of these environmental protection laws have accomplished, we still have communities across our nation that are being impacted, even devastated, by ongoing and growing environmental degradation. This is the Stauffer family. The Stauffer family lives in a beautiful community called General Warren Village. Unfortunately, right next door is this site, the Bishop Tube site. The Bishop Tube site, over the last 50+ years, despite all of the environmental protection laws we have in place, has become highly contaminated, saturated with dangerous toxins, including heavy metals and something called trichloroethylene, TCE. TCE is a known human carcinogen, and it has many harmful health impacts for those who are unfortunate enough to be in regular contact with the chemical. Despite the fact that this site has been known to be contaminated in such dangerous ways for all these years, the Stauffer family and the other members of the General Warren Village have no idea when and to what degree this site is going to be cleaned up. Despite all of those environmental protection laws we have in place which says this should not have happened, and once it happened, something should have been done to address the problem. We have communities like the people in Minisink who used to live in a wonderful, healthy, clean environment. The people of Minisink moved to Minisink because of the wonderful, healthy environments there. And yet they recently found themselves being threatened with construction of a fracked gas compressor station. They fought against the construction of this compressor station because compressor stations are known to be a serious source of air contaminants of all kinds, including hazardous air pollutants. And they are known to cause illnesses of all kinds for the communities who are unfortunate enough to have to live next to them. Despite all of the efforts of the people of Minisink, relying upon all of the environmental protection laws in place that they were seeking to grab a hold of, they now find themselves with the Minisink compressor station right in the middle of their community. And it is absolutely having impacts on the quality of life and the health of the people that live there. We have people like the folks in Eastwick, who when they leave their house, if it's about to rain, they have to stack sandbags in order to keep the rising waters out of their homes. Now, some of this, you might say, okay, maybe it's because we're having increasing rain and rainfall due to climate change. Yes, that certainly will have its contribution, but the fact of the matter is the people in Eastwick are suffering from growing flooding and flooding damages because of inappropriate development that's being allowed to happen upstream and in neighboring communities and is throwing polluted stormwater into the creeks that are barreling down on the people in Eastwick. We have folks in Oklahoma who find themselves having to become hosts to fracked gas wastewater that's being brought to their communities to be injected into the ground as a means of disposing of this very highly toxic fracked gas wastewater. And as a result of the injection of that wastewater, Oklahoma is now in many years the earthquake capital of the United States of America. This is happening despite the fact that we have all of these environmental protection laws in place that you would have thought would have protected the people of Oklahoma from these kinds of devastating impacts. We have communities of color and low-income communities who continue to be targeted for environmentally degrading operations, industrial operations, highways, and the like. Communities of color are shown through science to have higher rates of exposure to air pollution, that their schools routinely are located near highly polluting operations, roads, industrial sites, and the like. If you look at the folks that are located, the communities located near toxic waste facilities, those that are located less than 2 miles away from these facilities are predominantly communities of color. Communities of color, children, colored children in utero have a higher rate of exposure to toxins that devastate their lives from the moment they are born moving forward. And it's not just our human communities that are suffering. Our animal friends, our plant friends are suffering as well. We continue to bring them to the brink of extinction and even over the edge, despite all of these environmental protection laws we have in place, like the genetically unique population of Atlantic sturgeon that exists nowhere else on Earth except in my beautiful Delaware River. And yet, despite the actions and activities and decisions of human communities over decades, we have brought this population of Atlantic sturgeon to the brink of extinction. There are only 300 spawning adults left of our genetically unique Atlantic sturgeon population. And yet, week in and week out, I learn of a new project and a new threat that I have to fight against to keep these Atlantic sturgeon from literally being placed on the death block. And all of this is happening despite all of these environmental protection laws that we have in place. Now, when I go around to communities and I talk about environmental degradation and I talk about environmental threats, whatever the threat, whatever the degradation, whatever the harm, after we've talked about what's going on, very quickly, people inevitably start asking the question, either out loud or in their minds, how is this possible? How is it possible that all of this harm continues to happen? Don't we as people have the right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment? Isn't that our right? And exactly, the answer is no. We don't. We have the right to free speech, we have the right to freedom of religion, we have private property rights, we have gun rights, we have rights of all kinds that are enumerated in the Declaration of Rights sections of our state and federal constitutions. But we do not have the right to a healthy environment. At least not in most places in the United States of America. There's very limited exceptions to that rule. Pennsylvania is one of only 2 exceptions to that rule. In Pennsylvania, you have in the Declaration of Rights section of the state constitution enumerated all of those other fundamental freedoms we hold dear that we learn about our entire lives. And you have the right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. So how is it possible that Pennsylvanians have this constitutional right to a healthy environment when other communities or other states across the nation do not? I mean, after all, Pennsylvania's history in terms of the environment is just as rich in environmental degradation and taking advantage of natural resources as the history of every other state in the United States of America. They have exploited their natural resources terribly. They have allowed industrial operations to spew pollution into the air and spew pollution into the water. They've allowed industrial operations to overwhelm Pennsylvania communities with their 24/7 noise, light pollution, and degradation. They've allowed pollution over the history of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. They've allowed so much pollution that they have damaged every aspect of people's lives, including taking away their drinking water. And everybody knows it. Everybody knew it. Everybody's watched it. Everybody's allowed it to happen. But Pennsylvania had something different than every other state in the nation. Pennsylvania had this gentleman, Franklin Curry. And Franklin Curry realized that one of the reasons why Pennsylvania's environment was being so devastated in so many ways was because the environment was not given that same highest level of recognition and protection in the Bill of Rights section of the state constitution, like all those other fundamental freedoms we hold dear. And so Franklin Curry decided that he, as a Pennsylvania state legislator, was going to change that. And he crafted up and proposed language be added to the Declaration of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution. And when this provision was put before the House of Representatives in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania in 1971, it passed unanimously. And when it was put before the Senate, it passed unanimously. And when it was put before the people of Pennsylvania, it passed overwhelmingly by a vote of 4-1. And suddenly, on that moment, on that day, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, you had a right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. So you would have thought that environmental protection in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania from that moment on would have been dramatically different than what we were seeing in every other state across the nation. But that wasn't to be the story for Pennsylvania. And it wasn't to be the story for Pennsylvania because in those early years, right after the environmental rights provision was added to the Pennsylvania Constitution, people overreached in how they attempted to use it. And the worst perpetrator in the overreach was the Pennsylvania government themselves. I'm not going to tell you the story, that kind of thing is in the book, but long story short, as described by the Chief Justice of the Pennsylvania Supreme Court at the time, almost as soon as this Environmental Rights Amendment was passed and made part of the Pennsylvania Constitution, the Pennsylvania Supreme Court emasculated it, disemboweled it, declared it mere public policy, robbed it of that legal strength that all the other provisions in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution had. And so for 42 years, the Environmental Rights Amendment of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the Green Amendment of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, was robbed of that power. And it didn't change anything in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And that was the situation until December 19th of 2013. And on that date, something changed. It changed because in the mid-2000s, drilling and fracking came to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And it brought with it all of its highly polluting industrial operations. The 24/7 noise, light, and pollution necessary to frack for gas and keep those operations going. It brought with it the deforestation and the land transformation of the many wonderful landscapes of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, just devastating them to accommodate the industry. It brought with it the creation of massive volumes of highly toxic frack wastewater, so toxic that even the industry doesn't know what to do with it except store it in pits on site, use it to frack other wells, or send it off to Oklahoma to inject into the ground where they can create earthquakes with it. It brought with it water pollution, pollution of streams and rivers and groundwater and wetlands and drinking water supplies. It brought with it air emissions, hazardous air pollutants, and dangerous climate-changing emissions like methane. The drillers and the frackers brought with them the proliferation of pipelines and other infrastructure necessary to advance this highly industrial and dangerous operation. And despite all of the environmental protection laws that we have in place in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and at the federal level that should have prevented all of those harms, it was really easy for the fracking industry to come into Pennsylvania and overwhelm our communities and devastate our environments. Very easy. But for the drillers and the frackers, it wasn't easy enough. And frankly, they had a captive audience of friends in the Pennsylvania legislature, so they decided they were going to make it even easier for themselves. So they went behind closed doors, literally, industry representatives went behind closed doors, and they wrote for themselves a piece of legislation. And that piece of legislation was passed by the Pennsylvania legislature in 2012, and it came to be known as Act 13. And Act 13 did a lot of bad things when it was passed, a lot of bad things. But just by way of example of what Act 13 did, Act 13 took from communities their ability to limit these highly industrial polluting operations associated with the fracking industry to the industrial zones of their communities. And Act 13 actually mandated that drilling and fracking be allowed to happen in every part of every community of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, in its historic and environmental preservation areas, in the agricultural districts, even in residential communities. In fact, by virtue of Act 13, the drillers and frackers, by law, were allowed to construct an operating fracking well pad as close as 300 feet from people's homes. And I've looked that up. That's like 0.833% of a football field. So it's not even the length of a football field. Could you imagine getting up out of your home, in your home one morning, and less than a football field away, having to have one of these fracking operations? It was devastating. At the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, we have been fighting against drilling and fracking with varying degrees of success since it came our way. We had obviously not prevented it from proliferating in one of our watershed states, Pennsylvania. We have kept it out of, and to this day have kept it out of, all the portions of the Delaware River watershed, including the Pennsylvania portions of the watershed. But, you know, we obviously had not stopped the industry. When Act 13 was passed, we realized, of course, that we had to find a way to take this on, to challenge this. We also realized that we might be in a moment in time when the Pennsylvania governor and legislature and the industry had so far overreached in how they were seeking to advance these dirty drilling operations that maybe we were in a moment in time when we could breathe life back into that Environmental Rights Amendment that had been ignored all those years. And so we teamed up with 7 towns and a physician to challenge Act 13. And the arguments that I, as the Delaware Riverkeeper, and my organization, the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, brought to the legal table through our attorneys was that Act 13 violated the Environmental Rights Amendment of the Pennsylvania Constitution. The case went all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court. And on December 19th, we got an amazing opinion. The plurality opinion was written by the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, very conservative Chief Justice of a very conservative Supreme Court. And the Chief Justice wrote in the opinion that day, by any responsible account, the exploitation of the Marcellus Shale Formation will produce a detrimental effect on the environment, on the people, their children, and future generations. That the natural resources that were being harmed by these dangerous industrial operations were resources essential to life, to health, and to liberty. And that as a result, the provisions of Act 13 that we were challenging were unconstitutional because they violated the Environmental Rights Amendment of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And in that moment, on that day, we breathed legal life into the Green Amendment of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. We restored to the people of Pennsylvania their constitutional right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. Chief Justice Castile, though, said and did other important things in that opinion he wrote that day. Amongst the things that Chief Justice Castile wrote in his opinion, recognized in his opinion, that our right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment is an inherent, indefeasible, inalienable right that belongs to us by virtue of the fact that we are people here on this earth. They are not rights that were given by the constitutional provision. They were rights that already belonged to us, but that were recognized by the constitutional provision, and as a result of the Green Amendment, were given the highest level of protection under the law that you can have in the United States of America. That as a result of this constitutional provision, every government official at every level of government has an obligation to protect the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. And that they have to protect those rights, not just for the people who are here today, but for the generations yet to come. After this incredible opinion came down, I had to take a breath and enjoy it. But you only have a moment to enjoy it, right? Because we're all battling on so many fronts. But I did take a step back and think about, what do we do now? What's next? Well, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, since that wonderful day, we have gone forth and continued through our advocacy and through our litigation to defend and define what it means to have an environmental right in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And to go and make sure that all those government officials who for all those years had ignored the Environmental Rights Amendment were disabused of the notion that they could do that anymore. We're going around making clear to them, you have an obligation to honor this constitutional right. But I also believe that there is a message that goes far beyond the boundaries of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. There's really a message for all of us. The first part of that message is that we all have to embrace the truth of what Chief Justice Castile said that day. That our right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment is an inalienable, inherent, indefeasible right that belongs to us by virtue of the fact that we are here on this earth. And we need to rise up and defend that right as firmly and as passionately as we defend all of our other fundamental freedoms when they are infringed upon. Do you ever hear anybody, when there is an infringement on their right to free speech, freedom of religion, or their gun rights, do you ever hear them, after they've lost the battle, sit down quietly and say, whew, lost that one? No. Never. They rise up and they continue to battle on. We have to do that for our environmental rights. We have to demand and defend our environmental rights. We have to go forth, I believe, with a Green Amendment movement and secure constitutional level recognition and protection for our environmental rights in every state constitution in the nation and at the federal level. And why do we need a movement? Why do we need a movement? We need a movement because we only have this right in 2 states. in Pennsylvania and Montana. The states in green. Now the states in purple, they talk about the environment in their constitutions, but they don't give it that Green Amendment level protection that's so vitally important. They're just not Green Amendments, what they have in their constitutions. They do things like talk about fishing, hunting rights, navigation, even in some states, how you can go forth and exploit natural resources. That's their discussion of the environment. But they don't talk about protection of the right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. In the language of the provisions, even the language that's written very beautifully, they declare that the provision itself is just a statement of good public policy. So they instantly rob it of that substantive legal power that it really needs. And or they say, well, you've got this right to a healthy environment, it's a wonderful thing, but you only have it to the extent that the legislature defines it and implements it, protects it for you. So if your legislature in those states pass sucky environmental protection laws, where your constitutional right has been vindicated, but you are no better off, nor are your natural resources. And the most important thing is they don't put the provision, they don't put the language in the Declaration of Rights section of the Constitution. So it is on par with all of those other fundamental freedoms, those other inalienable rights we hold dear. And so as a result of all these things, one, some, or all of them, depending on which state you're looking at, these are not Green Amendments. And then we have 15 states that have nothing. They don't talk about the environment at all in their constitutions. And of course, we don't have a provision in the federal constitution either. So that's why we need to go forth and have a movement. Now, if you're wondering what's the situation in Louisiana, Louisiana is one of the states that talks about the environment in their constitutions, but not in a way that rises to a Green Amendment. It's not in the Bill of Rights section. In one of the provisions, they talk about hunting, fishing, and trapping rights. In the next provision, they do start to talk about water and air and healthy environments. But they include the language which makes it suffer the fatal flaws. They say it's good public policy, and they say it's up to the legislature. So if your laws here in the state of Louisiana aren't doing the job of protecting your natural resources or the health and safety of your communities in terms of the impacts from the environment, well, this constitutional provision doesn't help you. So the question becomes, is Louisiana in a moment in time, like Pennsylvania was in 1971, when the people of Louisiana are willing and wanting to rise up and demand and defend their environmental rights and seek and secure a Green Amendment in the Louisiana Constitution? And I think if you look at the news headlines, just do a Google search really quick, that's all I had to do. If you look at the news headlines, you will see Louisiana is in that moment in time. And if we're not in that moment in time here in Louisiana, we can get people there pretty quickly by just showing them the truth of what's happening. And that's the situation in every state and every community across the nation. Look at the headlines, and you will see that we are all being adversely impacted by the state of degradation of our environment. Our political system and our legal system simply is not doing the job, is not designed to do the job of preventing all of this pollution and degradation. Now, in fact, since we've launched this Green Amendment movement, we've had some really great success. Earlier, well, middle of last year, can't say this year anymore, 2017, I got to join with legislators who we have been working with that were proposing a Green Amendment for the New York Constitution. And then a few months ago, stood with legislators that we had been working with to propose a New Jersey Green Amendment. And just earlier this week, had the good fortune of testifying on behalf of a Green Amendment that we have been helping to advance in the state of Maryland. So communities are seeing it, communities are getting it. I've been talking with people in Florida and Texas and other states. People want to be in that moment. And frankly, the state of the politics at the national level is making it really, really easy to make the case. Because the President and the Congress are just piling on in terms of the environment. And the only way you're going to hold the President or the Congress accountable is if we have a Green Amendment in the federal Constitution, at least for so much of what they're doing. And so then people, they love this idea and they love this message. I hope you do too. But people really wonder, will it really change anything? Will it really make a difference? And I'm here to tell you it absolutely will change things, and it absolutely will make a difference in very, very real ways. If we can just imagine what it would be like to have green amendments across the United States of America. If we had green amendments across the United States of America, it would be a fact, it would be a legal fact that people had a right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. That those rights would be protected legally on par with those other fundamental freedoms we hold dear, like freedom of religion and freedom of speech. That there would be a legal obligation to protect those rights, not just for those of us who are here today, but for the children and the generations yet to come. That every government official at every level of government would have an absolute legal obligation to defend the environmental rights of every person in our nation. That nobody would have to ask their government officials, will you please do me the favor of protecting the environment? But everybody would go to those public meetings and those rallies and those Capitol halls at the federal level and at the state level, and they would expect that their legislators would do right by the environment. It would be a mind shift. They would no longer be hoping. They would be expecting environmental protection. Advocates, when they rose up at public meetings to advocate for environmental protection, no longer would the opposition get away with saying, oh, you're just a tree hugger, you're just a fish lover, you're a job killer or a people hater. Sit down and be quiet. No, no, no. They wouldn't be able to say that to us anymore, because now we would be patriots. We would be patriots because we were rising up to defend our constitutional right to a healthy environment. Entirely different playing field. It would be very clear that when decision makers were making decisions, that they would have to accomplish their business goals, their development goals, whatever goal it was they were trying to achieve, they would have to find a way to achieve it in a way that they were protecting the environment at the same time. They couldn't just set the environment aside. They had to think about it from the get-go. Government officials would have an obligation to refrain from inflicting degradation on the environment themselves with a law like Act 13. They would have an obligation to protect the environment from degradation by others. They couldn't issue a permit that allowed some industrial operator to infringe on somebody's environmental rights. That wouldn't be allowed anymore. And where the environment had already been so degraded that people's environmental rights had been taken from them, now there would be a duty to take action to restore. It wouldn't be good enough for government officials, legislators, regulators, or others to simply check the boxes and say the decision they were rendering or the permit they were issuing complied with a statute or complied with regulations. They now have to take that extra level look and say, but is issuing this decision going to result in that much extra pollution that we would overstep and infringe on somebody's environmental rights? There's an extra check that has to take place. Environmental justice would be strengthened because there would be a duty of impartiality. There would be a duty on government officials to treat everybody equitably in every community, present generations, future generations. Every single person would have the co-equal right to a healthy environment. And so government officials would have to protect those rights equitably, no matter what the income, no matter what the color of the skin, no matter what the physical or mental capacities of the community that was going to be impacted, no matter how that community had been treated in the past. Environmental justice would be strengthened all the way around, and we would have no more environmental sacrifice zones. It simply wouldn't be allowed anymore. We would have to have science-based decision-making, because the only way government officials could defend their decisions when challenged is they would have to be able to prove that it was the right decision. That means that they relied on good facts and good science. They would have to show that they looked at individual impacts as well as cumulative impacts of the decisions that they were making. And when they got it wrong, and when they overstepped and infringed on people's environmental rights, the people would have the right to go to the courtroom and hold them accountable. No longer would you have to find a state statute or a federal statute that gave you the right and ability to walk into court. You would have that right, because a properly written and placed environmental rights amendment is self-executing, meaning if it is infringed upon, you get to go straight to court to enforce it. And it's not just the adults that get to enforce it, but it's the young people that get to enforce it. The young people have a very, very important role to play in this battle, because after all, it is their future that is being so impacted by the decisions that we are making today. And so that's why we're making extra effort with the book, The Green Amendment, to try to get this message into the schools so that children aren't just learning about the right to free speech, but they are learning about their right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. And the fact that there is something that they can do about getting that right properly acknowledged and protected under the law. So there's more I can say, but I won't, because the rusty nail is calling. So I just want to say that I hope that all of you, are going to leave this room thinking a little bit differently about whether or not the environmental protection laws we have in place, the political system we have in place, is really doing right by us when it comes to the environment. That you will recognize with me that our environmental protection laws are in fact failing us, but that there's something that we can do about it. And what we can do about it is rise up together and seek and secure constitutional level protection, green amendments in every state constitution across the nation and at the federal level. So thank you for coming.
There are a certain percentage of state legislatures that have to pass it before it goes to the Congress. And what do you think? How do you think that is going to work?
Yeah. So first off, whether you're talking about state or federal, right? Every state and the federal has a different process for how you get a green amendment. Some of them actually, there are constitutional conventions that have to be voted upon, but pretty much all, and I won't say all, but I think pretty much all states and at the federal level, there is a legislative process where there is an amendment proposed that has to go before the legislature and be passed one time, sometimes two times. Like in the state of New Jersey, it's one time if you get a certain volume of votes, it's two times if you get a lesser level of votes, and then it goes before the people. And it's going to be in every state, and certainly at the federal level, it's going to be a job. It's going to be a job for all of us to get that to happen. But I believe that there is value that comes out of the process of fighting for a green amendment, because people really don't realize across the board that they don't actually have the right to expect that when they get that glass of water out of their kitchen faucet, that it is going to be free of contaminants that could pollute their bodies and make them sick. People don't think about the environment the same way they think about their free speech rights. So part of the process of getting a green amendment is we have to teach people about that, and people get angry about that, and they get incensed about that, and they really truly can't believe that that's the reality. So there's value in that learning process that's necessary to advance the green amendment. In addition, right, you get people mobilized and get them active. So often communities and environmental activists are fighting against something. No, no, no. This is a way to really fight for something very, very positive. And all the industry can do when they challenge it is really take the position that they don't believe that you or I have the right to clean water and clean air. What a ridiculous position for them to take. So we can expose them for that. Right? We can expose them for that. But the other piece of it is I think it also changes the lay of the land when it comes to politics. Because no longer are we going to vote people into office that aren't going to vote for the Green Amendment that we're securing. In fact, when political events are going on and debates are going on, every politician in office and or running for office will be asked the question, do you believe that I have the right to clean water, clean air, and a healthy environment? And when you have the opportunity to vote for that right, will you vote for it? And we're not going to elect people to office or elect people to stay into office if they are not going to protect our right to clean water, clean air, and a healthy environment. So now we've changed entirely the dynamics of the politics. And we're going to be getting real environmentalists elected to office because everybody gets it. gets it. We all need clean water, clean air, healthy soils to grow healthy foods, healthy environments to live long, wonderful, healthy lives. And so we can get everybody on board with voting for the right people to get into office. I do believe that the Green Amendment movement starts at the state level because it's much easier to get people organized and advancing a state-level constitutional provision. I do not believe that we should be jumping right in to get a federal constitutional provision. As much as I want one, and as much as we need one, I do not believe that that's the right place to start. I believe we have to start state by state by state. And if we start to get green amendments moving in state after state after state, and people becoming aware of these issues and becoming supportive of this concept, very naturally, we will get people to realize and to recognize, oh my gosh, I don't just want and need a green amendment in my state constitution, but we want and need one at the federal level as well. And so we'll bring people to that place through the state-by-state strategy. Any other questions? Yeah.
Do you know if anyone has tried to implement the Green Amendment in any of the southern oil and gas states?
So, well, I think that's part of my point, is they don't have a Green Amendment. Pennsylvania does and Montana does. So in Pennsylvania, we certainly have a lot of fracking going on. And we are using the Green Amendment in Pennsylvania to change the dynamics of what's happening there. While the provision was put in the Pennsylvania Constitution in 1971, as I said very quickly, in 1973, it was robbed of its legal strength and power. So it's almost as if we only got a Green Amendment on December 19th of 2013, right? So just a few short years ago. But already, first off, instantly, we stopped that Act 13. And those horrible provisions in Act 13. And we've been having other successes. We and others riding on our coattails have been using the Green Amendment in our advocacy and in our litigation and continue to define what it means to have an environmental right and are getting successes in the fracking world and outside of the fracking world that's continuing to advance this right. When we get Green Amendments passed in any state, right, we don't instantly shut everything off because it's not instantly clear what it means to have a constitutional right to a healthy environment. So in 2013, when we got that decision, we didn't instantly stop all of the infringements on environmental rights because we have to go and do the work of defining what that means and how we get there and how we get that. So in those southern states, I hope that every southern state will go undertake the effort of seeking and securing a Green Amendment and then implementing it. And I really believe, and I believe we will prove this in time, I do not believe that you can have drilling and fracking and honor people's rights to a healthy environment. It is absolutely impossible. You cannot regulate that industry to make it safe. But you can create all the energy we need in ways that are absolutely safe and environmentally protective through all the Green Amendment, through all the green energy approaches that we have available to us. So it's not about how do you frack for gas, it's about how do you create energy. And when the question is properly framed, how do you create energy? We've got lots of ways to create the energy we need. And we can be totally supported by green energy options by the year 2050 in every single state in this nation and in the nation as a whole, if we just go down that proper path. Mm-hmm.
Have you worked with any of the big green, Sierra Club or with National Wildlife or anything to present this idea as a national program that they could be implementing?
So, yes, in that I wrote the book and anybody can read it. And really I'm just going forth to, community after community trying to spread the good word. As I said, I really do believe that it's a state initiative. So I don't really think it's right for somebody to hop on it and try to run with it at the federal level. I think there's also, there are a lot of nuances that people don't understand, so it's important for people to get educated before they jump on the bandwagon. For example, in Florida, there was a provision that was proposed, and very sadly, I had to quickly reach out to all the people in Florida and say, we've got to defeat this before we can get a true Green Amendment, because it wasn't done right. So I will work with anybody who wants to work with me to advance this cause in any state in the nation. In some states, in rooms like this, perhaps there are people from those organizations and they're excited and want to get on it, and I'll work with them. And if not in this room, perhaps the next room.
This is more a comment than a question. Your presentation, it's fabulous what you're working on, and what it reminds me more than anything is the fight for the right to marriage equality, which started in Vermont. They had a civil union. They passed the civil union, and then in Massachusetts they passed the right to marry. And sort of gradually, in the places that were more open to it, they started doing it, right? And then and they would do like one state, one little municipality, and gradually, you know, over the course of 20 years, it took 20 years, but now we have a national right to marry. And I think that that might be just a fabulous model for you. And for us in Louisiana, we might think, okay, we're not going to start with the state legislature, right? But maybe we start with Orleans Parish. Maybe it's not a constitutional amendment, but the city charter. I think we have a city constitution. Maybe we amend the city charter. So I think it's a fantastic idea, and I agree with you completely. We should have started at the federal level. When marriage equality went to the federal level, we quickly got this thing called the Defense of Marriage Act, which just eliminated the right to marry. But there are great models for doing the kind of thing that you're doing in other areas than environmental law.
And I think that that's a great comment, and it really speaks to the mindset that I have in that the truth is I'm not going to go around and pass green amendments everywhere. It really has to come from the community, and every community is going to pursue it differently. So in New York and New Jersey, where I do a lot of work, right, we had a good strategic opportunity to go straight to some champion legislators. In Maryland, we're doing it a little bit differently, right? In Florida, the folks I'm talking with there are doing it differently. So here in Louisiana, as you said, there might be a different approach and a different strategy that works better for Louisiana. While I won't be the one, you know, doing it, I will absolutely would love to be the one to come into those rooms with you and help spread the message and help make sure that the effort gets off on the right foot using the right language.
Right.
You know, all anybody who's interested in this idea has to do is give me a call, and I will do whatever I can to help you. Because like I said, it's really important it gets off on the right foot. If we get off on the wrong foot, then we're going to end up with a lot of the useless provisions like we have in those 33 states. And that's the path that Florida, unfortunately, was on. So I just want to help people get on the right foot. I want to be there as a resource to help communities, to do what I can through the book to help build support for the efforts that are happening where they're happening. And again, all anybody has to do is call me up. Go to myeventrossum.green, DelawareRiverkeeper.org, or forthegenerations.org. In any of those places, you'll find tools and materials to help advance the cause, and you will find out how to reach me. And I will be wherever it is you want me to be, if it's helpful. So thank you. But I think that's a great idea, that idea of starting with local charters in places where that's a strong part of the government. I think that's a fabulous idea. Any other questions? Yes?
Well, first, thank you for your talk, and you've made me think a little bit about, I guess, American history and the origin of our rights. And then when Jefferson did the Declaration of Independence, he's talking about the Creator having endowed us with rights. But by the time we get to the more, modest time of the Constitution, it's we the people that are conferring and agreeing to these rights as a republic. And as I heard you describe this, it sounded more and more like we're talking about a form of natural right. We're talking about something that's God-given rather than based on our political community or what we would say a normal constitution. And it sounded to me like you felt that if these things passed, that the right of the people would be superior under your Green Amendment than the right to free speech or other rights that are granted by the community. And I just wondered, could you comment on this? Are we talking now about a religiously derived right, or are we talking about something that's coming during the normal American process of constitution writing?
So I think that's a great question. I really try to use language that doesn't define it for people. Everybody, truthfully, is going to experience and come to the answer to your question differently based on their own beliefs, whether it's natural rights, whether it's God-given, whether it's earth-given, whether it's a different creator of a different religion. Everybody's going to have their own sense of why we have these rights. But I do believe in my experience, and maybe there are some folks where I'm wrong, but I do believe in my experience with all the people I've worked with from all these different sectors over all these different years, everybody, whatever is the genesis of that belief, believes that they have the right to a healthy environment, to clean water, clean air, healthy soils, and a healthy environment. But for different people, it comes from different places. Just in Maryland, in fact, the two of the people sitting at the table with me testifying, they come at it very much from a religious perspective. But then the other gentleman from the NAACP who was sitting next to me, he came from it with a different angle. I come at it, I don't want to color, so I try to, again, use language to let everybody come to this place based on their own sets of beliefs. Having the provision in the Declaration of Rights does not make it superior to the rights to free speech, freedom of religion, or property rights. But it absolutely makes it on par. So where that plays out most fundamentally is in the juxtaposition of environmental rights with property rights. So right now, when you have an industrial operation that's being advanced and being built, right, the property right of the owner of the property that wants to build the development or the industrial operation or the whatever, they don't just have legal protections, but they actually have a property right to use their property as they see fit. Now, there are legal limitations, but it's rooted in that Constitution. That is not counterbalanced by an environmental right rooted in the same part of the Constitution. So de facto, the environmental right is beneath the property right. And it's easy to argue that that property right is superior. If you bring the environmental right up on par with the property right by putting it in the Declaration of Rights section of the Constitution, they are now co-equal. And now the decision makers really do have to find a way to protect both rights. And if they can't, they have to have a very sound justification for why they are raising, for example, the property rights up over the environmental rights. And there are constitutional legal principles that help courts decide that. For example, if government officials want to overstep on somebody's constitutional rights, right, part of the justification often that they have to provide is that there's a compelling state interest. And that they are doing it in the way that least infringes upon the right that's being infringed upon, right? There are standards that have to apply. Those same standards would now apply to the environmental right as well as those other rights. I will tell you, and the Pennsylvania courts and the Supreme Court have made that very clear, right? But they have also said, we do have a court decision that does say, when you're in that situation, right, where you've got competing interests, that the constitutional provision, as the one judge said, places a thumb on the scale to the benefit of the environment. So there's that little extra heft because, for example, the property interest belongs to the one, but the environmental rights belong to the many, right? And so it gives it a little bit of extra heft. Does that help?
Yes.
Yes.
One quick question. First of all, I'm sorry to see you've lost your enthusiasm for this. And secondly, I've been following public trust cases across the country. I think the Children's Trust is an interesting one. I'm not suggesting this is necessarily in lieu of the legislative process, But do you think we can get to some aspect of this jurisprudentially? I mean, public trust principles have always been, a fundamental check on sovereign power, and that's pretty much what the Children's Trust atmospheric case is trying to assert. Do you see anybody, I mean, in some of those states that don't have what you have, do you see anyone using that path, and is it instructive?
So there are a couple of different elements to that. First off, the case pursued by our Children's Trust, yes, there are some of them that are public trust doctrine types of cases, and then there's also ones, and just speaking with them, where they are trying to have read into existing constitutional language, right? The right to life, liberty, and happiness necessarily means the right to a healthy environment. So they're sort of going about this process in a different way. They're trying to shoehorn it into pre-existing language. And what I'm simply saying is, let's not shoehorn it in. Let's be absolutely clear. This is what we want, this is what we expect, this is what we need. So no judge has to decide for us whether or not the right to life, liberty, and happiness requires those things. But nonetheless, I think there are Children's Trust cases where they're attempting to do that is wonderful and powerful and important, and if successful, can be a huge leap forward. The public trust doctrine is another powerful legal doctrine, but it has its limitations. It tends to be focused, right, more on those shorelines and those water rights issues. We're talking about a broader set of issues. So the public trust doctrine absolutely has its place, but and is of value, like so many laws we have, but I don't think it rivals having a Green Amendment. Now, in the amendment language that we recommend, when I cracked up straw man language for folks, we actually don't, and people think we talk about trust because the government holds the natural resources in trust for the community in some portions of the Pennsylvania provision. But there, we're not relying on the public trust doctrine. We're actually relying on traditional trust language, right, where the government is holding the natural resources in trust for the beneficiaries, and the beneficiaries are all the people. And using that trust language and that trust approach brings a whole interesting body of law, which is that body of law that says you have to treat everybody equitably, right? So that's why we recommend not public trust language, but trust language in constitutional provisions, the ideal constitutional provision. And then the other piece that you didn't mention, but that's also very interesting and of course advancing, and there was an effort to advance it in Colorado unsuccessfully, but it comes up often, is the rights of nature, right? And so that right for, right now, if you have the natural resources devastated, the only way a person can get to court to defend the rights of that river from being polluted or devastated is by making the case that they themselves have been directly harmed. Whereas if you have the rights of nature, you just have to prove that that natural resource has been harmed and you're its champion, and then you are literally championing the rights of nature. So that's another interesting strategy that people sort of lump into this approach, which is wonderful, a wonderful opportunity. It hasn't succeeded yet, but if it did succeed, that would be terrific. So I think that all of these are different pathways that are really important. I personally believe that the Green Amendment approach has the clarity that is needed, and it uses the legal construct that our communities are used to, that constitutional construct that is so powerful. We've all been raised to understand about our fundamental freedoms, our fundamental rights, and how we should behave when they're infringed upon. And if we can get people to see the environment in that same pot, I think we just bring a whole new wave of thinking as well as legal protection.
Thank you.